All right. Let's call the meeting to order February 10th, 2023, and begin with the first item. So, approval of the draft minutes for January 2023. Motion to approve. Is that you, David? A second? Mary Beth,
I'll
second.
second.
Okay. And then any discussion, corrections? All right. All in favor of approving as drafted?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Matt Dunn abstains. All right, thank you. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Motion to approve, anyone? Matt Dunn motions, David Blitz seconds, and any modifications requested? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay. All right, so we have a guest. Provost Kathuria is here with us to discuss program review, and why don't you go ahead?
Yes. Oh, thank you, Professor Sir. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this idea. One of the things that we do in the system offices is to oversee the program review process and report it to the board. So according to our existing policy, all programs need to be assessed once every 7 years. So just some background context. What right now happens is every institution within the system has their own independent way of doing program reviews. And every program within an institution also has different ways of how they compile all this information, which is all good. Institutions can continue to do that. However, for board purposes, we were hoping to discuss this with the FAC today is, would you be willing to help us come up with a uniform process of how information needs to be compiled for the academic program review once every 7 years? And the reason we want uniformity is A, there will be a consistent way in which information will be relayed to the board. B, the second request is, can we develop a common calendar? And I'm going to throw out a radical idea, which I know is different from what is happening right now. Is this has to go back to every institution, obviously, but you're the first one who's hearing this. Can we develop a common calendar in such a way that all, let's say, business degrees across all our institutions, they do program review and they submit it to us in 1 year? All biology degrees come in the next year, all mathematics degrees come in the third year, and then the history. That what happens is, not only are we going to get information in a consistent format, we will be able to do or understand what is happening in our institutions around the system, because all the data is going to be in front of us at the exact same time. Right now, let's say if Eastern submits its business report in 22, Western submits in 24, you see what happens? The information gets staggered and it's very difficult to see across the system what is happening. So two requests. One, can we come up with a common format? So we're talking about the process right now. Can we come up with the common format or common application which all institutions agree to? And then can we come with a common calendar? So we know that we can do an equitable comparison across institutions to see how programs are doing. And just to save you time, what we can do is, and I've discussed this with Professor Sasankar, I'm happy to share a draft version. And again, it is a draft of a draft, but what you will see, if you're okay with it, is you'll see the headers of what the form should look like. And it is meant for discussion. It is meant for you to provide feedback. You all will have the opportunity to say, no, this data collection of this thing doesn't make sense, or you forgot about this thing. Any modifications that you need to see in the form, you can. This would be the perfect time for you to recommend that changes. And I would like to request if I can get some initial feedback, let's say in the next 2 weeks, because at the end of the day, what needs to happen is this needs to go back to every institution, needs to go through the governance processes. So that part will happen, but I want FAC to weigh in first because this is the first faculty body that is going to see this draft form. So that's my pitch, and I would love to open this up for discussion, questions, and see what's the will of the group.
Mike Shea has a hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Thank you for bringing this to us. I appreciate your time and effort in that. I think one of the big problems is going to be that I think everyone's wary of bigger consolidation or more consolidation. Um, and so putting everything back on a common time scheme like that kind of reinforces that notion that it's going to be easier to turn the whole CSU system into one big college or the 4 colleges into one, as has happened with the community colleges. And I think, you're going to get a lot of pushback on that or concern about that. I'm wondering if you could uh, address that because I think, with I think there's a lot of again, I just think people are really concerned, especially with the budget situation, that that you're just going to end up with one big CSU as with the community colleges. And so if we put in all 17 institutions on the same schedule, and I understand why that makes sense, but I hope you can also understand why it would make people suspicious.
Absolutely, Michael. I hear you loud and clear on this one. And Michael, perception, how perceptions they're louder than the truth. But uh, first of all, this form will not start right away. It will start next year. So things will get slightly easier because there'll be 6 institutions then. I'm still trying to figure out how the whole thing will work out. Uh, I am coming from a different perspective. So first of all, nobody is talking, at least I speak only for myself. Nobody is talking about CSU consolidation, at least not in the system office, right? However, again, perception is important. Uh, what I would say to that is, the reason I am doing this is for making personally my life a little easier, because when I look at one form which is done in one way versus another form which is done in a completely different way, it is very hard for me to actually make a comparison. I mean, it can be done, but it takes a lot longer. It's a much bigger lift. So in order to make comparison between programs and between institutions, it will make sense, personally speaking from my individual perspective, for me, if I am looking at documents that look and feel the same. We all feel that. I always use the income tax forms as an example, and that's not a good example, but we all, even though however much we dislike that process, we all fill those forms out. Uh, I'm just coming from a point where I'm trying to make my life slightly easier so that I can make an informed decision that, yes, here is a program that is struggling, here is a program that is doing well, and then learn from the best practices. What is it that institution A is doing in program Y because of which it is successful, and how can we learn from their best practices? So I'm coming from a place of, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to educate myself, and I'm trying to create a process which makes the whole learning process easier. That was my incentive of thinking like this. But I hear you loud and clear about the
Yeah,
concerns of the perception of consolidation. But I can tell you very, very clearly on the record, nobody is talking about CSU's consolidation, at least not in my office. That has never ever happened. Never even mentioned like that this is what we need to do. No, that's not at all the intent here.
I appreciate your thorough address to my concern. The only thing I would say is, again, I think a thing that raises people's suspicions is there's so much talk now about systemness and low completer programs. What are you going to do with low computer programs that you cancel them entirely or consolidate them into one program and one campus? So I think there maybe there's not been direct talk about combination, but I think there's been a lot of indirect talk again about systemness and all of that that I think feeds that perception even further. So I appreciate your answer, and I think you understand what I'm saying,
Oh,
and I just
absolutely.
hope the system office can hear that and kind of gear back on language that pushes it in the other direction.
Right, right. And again, I have a personal. I'm trying to use this as an opportunity to make more informed decisions. For example, and a lot of times what happens is programs go through this process, and then nothing happens after the process is completed. So what I'm trying to learn from this is what needs to happen. See, I don't know what I don't know right now, right? This would be an opportunity for me to actually say program A from campus A is doing this well because they are doing these things. Program B on campus B is not doing well, even though they're in the same discipline, same zip code, because probably they could learn what program A is doing, right? So I'm trying to use this opportunity to teach myself and do a relatively easier comparison, because I can still do a comparison. It just takes a lot longer because business degree from campus A comes in 2022, the other one comes in 2024, and you know what happens. Once things get past you, they get past you, right? But if I get all business degrees at the same time, it'll be a much more learning opportunity for us in the system office to go back and look into this and see, okay, here are the concerns, or here is what is working well within our institutions. That is all I'm trying to do here, because I truly believe in myself, in my heart, that there's a lot more we can do out of this process. We can benefit from this process because we are not closing the loop the way we should be. So that's my pitch here. Uh, and Colina, I can see David, so I see his hand, but can you coordinate, because I'm on a cell phone right now? So David, please go ahead.
David.
Yeah, fine. I do appreciate your coming before us, Provost Katoria, and that certainly is an improvement over past non-practices. And so I think that we should take this into account. And often we find it difficult to recognize that there is new leadership at the system office because of previous conflicts and controversies. That said, I understand the importance of having some degree of commonality, or as you put it, uniformity. And I just want to mention, it seems to me also important to take into account the distinct missions of the colleges and universities. So there might be one way that forms are done, or there might be some differences between forms for the colleges for associate degrees and forms for the universities, where in addition to bachelor's degrees, you have also master's and in several cases, doctoral level degrees. That's the first point that I wanted to make. Secondly, I do share Mike Shea's concerns, and I know that faculty have expressed that to me, and not just consolidation of institutions. I understand that that is not in the books now or some future time for the universities, and President Cheng has been quite clear on that point. There is, however, the question of consolidation of programs. I do think we need to address that, particularly given one of the statements in the CSU 2030 about common programs and so forth given online. The third point that I want to make is that I haven't seen the draft, and I appreciate your eventually making this or immediately making this available to us. And I'm just a little concerned that it's just, a spreadsheet with numbers. The quantitative, of course, is important, but as a philosopher, I'm obliged to mention the relationship between the quantitative and the qualitative. And sometimes there are aspects of the experience of programs which are not quite reflected in the numbers and then the comparisons that you can make between numbers on spreadsheets from institution A to institution B or program A to program B. So I would hope that in any form that we develop, there's also place for qualitative considerations, the relationships between one program and others, and also the outcomes and experiences of the faculty and the students who are involved in those programs?
So I'll say absolutely. This is the opportunity where FAC can weigh in and say, hey, Rai, you forgot to add this question. You should add a question on qualitative. And it is by design that I have not shared the form yet, because when you share a form through email, email never conveys the sentiment behind it, right? And it also looks like it's a done deal. It's not. It's actually, what I don't want to do is give you a blank document, right? What I want to do is I want to give FAC a document that they can react to and say, this works, this does not work, this should be removed, So right now, think of it like as wet clay. FAC is the first set of hands that can actually get to mold it before I send it for additional feedback to every institution's back. Because I would like to start this process next year, or maybe the year after that. Again, we can talk about that when to start with the process. But I would love to have some kind of feedback. So again, to your point, David, absolutely. You want to see qualitative information? We can add those questions, however you choose to frame them, we can add them. So again, what will show up via email is just a list of headers that will eventually become into a form. Right now, it is just a Word document saying enrollment numbers, this, and this, right? Just a list of headers. You all have the opportunity to provide input at this. This is the very first time any faculty body is going to actually see that. Does that help answer that part?
Yeah, I do think so. That's
Okay.
I guess the problem is sometimes what we call spreadsheetitis.
So there's going to be spreadsheet in it, right? It will just show you the enrollment because we want the system office to get to a level where we should be able to track, and this will take some time. It will not happen right away. I would say at least a year or maybe even 2 years, but we want to get to a level where we have our institutional research office developed to that level that any faculty member or any employee within our institutions should be able to log in and should be able to see, okay, at my institution, here is the state of my institution in terms of enrollment, or actually I would like to dig down all the way to a program that in a BS in biology, and for everybody else who's here, I keep referring to biology because I'm a biochemist by profession. So I should be able to, I'm a faculty at Central. I want to go and see what happens in a BS in biology degree at Central for the last 5 years, what my enrollments were in my degree, what my retention was, what the graduation rate was. We are not there yet. I would love to get to that point. So one of the things you'll see in the form is this data, right? Data of enrollment by the degree, right? So we would love to get to that point where the system office is providing you all that information. So all that faculty are doing, faculty should not be doing data collection. They should be doing the reflection and the analysis on the data that will come in front of them. So again, it's a wishful thinking, but this is going to be our collective project. However, the faculty, not just in FAC, but faculty at our institutions also, they all will have the opportunity to weigh in and shape the form. And then when we all agree to something, right? And maybe not all, when most of us agree to something, we'll use that process moving forward. So again, I'm just giving you a starting point for the FAC to react to. That's all I'm trying to do right now. But I'm very much open to your suggestions and changes you'll suggest.
Mike, you have another question?
Yes, I just want to say, again, I've heard from colleagues in various positions and at different places that you're particularly collaborative in your approach. And again, I want to reiterate David's point about thanking you for coming to us, and it doesn't always happen. So we really appreciate that. And you mentioned that you wanted feedback from us in a couple of weeks. I think most times we would tend to take information you gave us back to our campuses and try to come up with some information. So it takes longer. But now I understand that you're saying that after you get feedback from us, you'll still go to the campuses. So it
Yes.
may not be a great need for us to go to our campuses to give you our immediate feedback. I would just give this caveat: when you go to the campuses, I would email it to the chairs of the curriculum committees as well as to the administrations, because you want the faculty, I think, the committees that determine those processes to see it immediately. So, and I don't know if you can easily access those chairs, but I think you could. And I just wanted to urge you, when you send it to the campuses, that you send it directly from you to the campus, to the faculty leaders of the evaluation processes, curriculum committees, whatever they are, rather than just to the institution. I hope that helps.
Yes, Michael, that actually helps. So I'll say two things here. A, I don't know who those chairs are. B, I also have to respect your institutional provost authority because I am unfamiliar with the culture at each institution right now. So my initial thought process was I would ask the institutional provost to follow their routine process, whatever the process is, because every institution is different, right? But in my email, I can say, please share this with your curriculum committee chairs. But I cannot tell them how to run their institutions, right? They have their own. I have to honor their, you know,
I understand. I
their
understand
authority
that.
over their institution.
I get that. I think I would just say something like what you just said, though, which is ask them to share it with faculty. Or
Absolutely, that I can do.
I think you want to come off as being interested in the faculty's feedback, and that won't
Absolutely.
always happen at all institutions. So that's all. I
This
think the more
this
if
is
your original
100%.
message,
Yeah,
if your
I'm
original
saying my
message asks for faculty input, I think that will help things go better for you.
Yeah, I apologize. I spoke in between. I think my internet broke off for like a fraction of a second. What I was saying was this is a faculty-led process because this is basically this information that we're going to collate is going to come from courses and programs, right? Which feeds into the program. So it is 100% faculty-led process. That's why I'm coming to FAC first. I am interested in learning what disciplinary faculty on every, so you can see, imagine the scale of the feedback I'm looking at right now. But I'll coordinate it to the provost, and to your suggestion, Mike, I'm definitely going to request the provost to please share this with their curriculum committee chairs as well. I'll make sure that the email says that explicitly.
And so what is the sort of maximum time frame that you want something back from us? I'm just thinking about, we share the draft, we come back together on March 10th, let's say, and discuss, and then do we put, like what's the sort of maximum time frame that you have for this kind of feedback?
So what I was trying to do was use the remaining part of the semester to go through our campus governance processes. So my wishful thinking was over the next 2 weeks, if you all as individual members of FAC, I want each one of you to look at that form and tell me what works, what does not work, what needs to be changed, right? And then I send it back to the campuses and say, here is this form with input from FAC, here are the changes that have been made, and start the process this semester and hopefully end this process this semester. So we can say that starting next year or the year after that, whatever the campuses decide, this is the form that everybody's going to use to report their 7-year program review process to the board. Again, my wishful thinking is if this semester I can complete the form and start using it, so when faculty come back in fall semester, they know this is the form, and in 2024, this is the form that needs to be submitted.
Okay.
I'm open to suggestions. It could be 25 also because program review process is an intense process. Maybe campuses need 1 year to plan and then 1 year to actually fill the form out because again, it's an intense process. So I'm leaning towards either 24 or 25. I'm very much open to however the campuses react to it.
Okay.
And this is I just want to add one more thing. Every institution is free to have their own process. That is absolutely fine. We are not saying this is and not or, right? And then I will also say there is no just one way. I'll take business as an example. 3 of the bachelor's degrees are AACSP accredited. And if you have seen those AACSP reports, they are intense, right? And what you will see is a lot of information in this form that I'll send to you is being influenced from AACSB. So there is no point asking business schools to redo and reformat the same data. So maybe for just the business degrees, we could go with the ACSB format. That makes their life easier and my life easier. School of Education has CAPE accreditation, right? So if you've seen the reports that they generate for CAPE accreditation, they are massive amounts of data they already have. They don't have to follow this because they have, as long as all institutions are reporting in the same format. So I'm very much open to additional. So if your institution has an American Chemical Society uh, uh, review process, right, then we can use the ACS review process for others also. So I'm not saying one form exactly same for everybody. It'll be nice, but if you already have a process in place, which is simple, ACSB is going to be exactly the same on 3 campuses, and then maybe the 4th campus, I'm talking about the bachelor's degree right now, can just adopt that process. So I'm very much open to creating a process where we have equitable comparison, but I'm not sticking to just one process. So I think Professor Blitz had mentioned one process for associate's degrees, one for bachelor's, one for master's. Absolutely, we can do that as long as we all agree to the process. So I just wanted to add that caveat there.
All right. I don't see any more questions, so I just want to really thank you again for bringing this to us, for asking for our input, for being here even though you're in transit. And I hope that we have you back at another meeting so we could properly introduce ourselves when you're not in a public place. But thank you again. And yeah, if you share that with me, I'll share it with the group. And then you're just looking for individual feedback. So
Right. Don't need to take it to the campuses just yet, because that is my very next step, is to go back to every institution, say, here is the intent, here is a draft, give me your feedback.
okay, and I'm sure you've noted the concerns and the wariness. I don't know if you've seen in the chat the discussion of the fact that a lot of this process ended up in consolidation at the community colleges. So just be aware that there will be some wariness there. But we are
Absolutely.
really
Uh,
happy to be asked to participate in this.
so, Paulina, I have one thing to say. I'm on my cell phone and I did not even look at chat. Can you copy and paste that information in an email for me, please? Sorry, I should have.
I'll convey it, and I think you've heard most of this
Okay,
already, in conversation. I'm just noting that it has come up again, so you know that it's still
absolutely,
there. Okay. All right.
absolutely.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Um, so I see that where are you? Ben Barnes and Sean Bradbury are with us. So we are good to move on to our next topic. So last time we talked, we had seen CSCU 2030. I appreciate you all coordinating your outfits for the occasion. Stripes, I see. Um,
This is completely unplanned, so.
you spend way too much time together, apparently. So yeah, we'd seen the just sort of written proposal, but there were details in it that we didn't quite get. We asked President Chang to come visit with us also, because I think there are aspects of the academic elements of that program that aren't specified, and that makes sense. It's not a document for us; it's a document for those external to us. So if we could just begin with a little review of what's in that proposal, and maybe even a little discussion now that the governor has given his budget proposal of where we stand in relation to that, and then we can ask questions. So I don't know which of you wants to begin.
I defer to Ben, but I think he's muted right now.
Sorry, I'm on the road myself, and I don't have my mouse, so it's harder for me to find the mute button. But here I am. So thank you all for the opportunity to talk about where we're at. I am happy to talk through the basic components of the plan. Like what's in it financially and how that sort of breaks out across the system. We certainly have put together. Let me start by saying there are two major parts. There's a capital and an operating request. The capital request consists of a 7-year capital authorization that we've requested We've also requested legislation that would allow that to be more predictably obtained for us, to create a multi-year bond program, sort of like what UConn is running through and what we've completed just now. We're wrapping up with the CSCU 2020 program. So that's relatively straightforward. We've put out lists of all the projects that are available on the website. We have proposed some language to make that happen, and we are working with the Treasurer's Office and the legislature to refine that proposal. I think we have a decent chance at it. I will say on the finance side that the governor has been opposed to other legislation offered by others that would that would rely on the same sort of multi-year capital funding mechanism that we recommended, or versions of it. And so we're not certain what to what degree that's the case. Although I did note, Sean, that baby bonds was included in the budget. So you never know. Maybe he's willing to, with sufficient pressure brought to bear, undertake multi-year capital authorizations. So that I feel pretty good about that. Those projects are the same projects that everybody's seen all along. The one different one is a new campus for Capital Community College in Hartford, but all the rest of it is the same. I mean, I say it's the same projects that everybody's seen all along if they've been paying attention to our requests, because nothing has moved in the last 4 years. And so we still need to replace Kinney Hall at Naugatuck Valley. We still need to do renovations at Nantucket. We still need to do the Wheaton and Snow building at Middlesex. Those are the highest priority projects in our system and have been for 5 years. The B Wing at Norwalk, they're feel free to look at the listings we provided on the website, and if they are the same projects that people have been talking about, that we've been designing and doing work to advance for a number of years. But one of the nice things about having your capital program not funded for several years is you become very familiar with all the projects because nothing has moved. You've had to read the same list over and over again. But we're pretty optimistic there. On the operating side, I'm going to just walk through quickly what sort of the major components of the plan are. So the total plan, if you consider what it would cost over the 7 years, so the 7 years of capital authorizations, which total $2.14 billion. So it's, it varies each year, but it's between 200 and 300 million a year, except in year 4, when we envisioned that we would actually construct a new capital campus. It's a little more that year because that's a big, expensive project. In addition, there are 2 other major components of the CSU 2030 plan. The next one we're calling sort of a PACT expansion or a PACT Plus. As you know, there's a $15 million program in effect right now that provides free community college as a last dollar program for 4,000 or 5,000 of our students at in the community college system. It has a lot of limitations. It has a lot of equity defects because it's a last dollar program and because it requires you to be first time ever in college. It requires you to be a Connecticut resident, and it requires you to be, initially full time, and now it's, I think, half time or more. But a lot of our students in the community college are part time or are returning students coming back to college after having dropped out at some time in the past. So there are a lot of folks who are left out of that. So we've asked for them to expand PACT for the community colleges broadly to cover everybody who's attending the community colleges. I will freely acknowledge that who everybody is a little complicated, and there are a lot of questions that we have to continue to work through. We have non-credit students, and we have a lot of different categories. Students who don't fill out FAFSAs, and how do we provide financial aid to somebody who isn't prepared to take that basic step? But we can work through those. That's about $50 million a year to expand the PAC program at the colleges. That's a pretty maximalist estimate of what that will cost. We've also asked for funding of about 40 million a year. We only asked for about half of it in the first year because of the startup, that would provide for a PACS program or a version of it for some students at Charter Oak State College and the state universities. The way we came up with that number is we proposed providing PACT for students who were in certain workforce related programs where where the state has identified an acute labor shortage for college educated workers. And so we focused on healthcare professions, nursing and related, as well as K-12 educators, so teaching in our teaching programs. And we developed a cost based on the net tuition of existing students in those programs. We've gotten a lot of feedback from members of the legislature. They have other ideas and other variations on how that would be put together. And we're beginning the process of discussing that. I know that I've put out a sort of informal call for volunteers on that, and we'll be calling together a group of sort of an ad hoc group of faculty and staff and interested insiders to work with us as we work with the legislature on negotiating the specifics of those proposals to the extent that we're successful. And I think we will be to some meaningful degree in both cases. There's real interest on both sides, I think. And so we have a good chance of getting something done in both a big expansion of the colleges and a substantial new financial aid program at the universities in Charter Oak. So that's the second piece. The total 7-year cost of the financial aid programs as we designed them and laid them out, which was very sort of preliminary, is $650 million. So over 7 years. So, just under moving over 100 as inflation takes hold over 7 years. The third component is what I think of as our supporting students and academic programs portion of the request. And this includes there are sort of two subparts to this. First is we developed for each component of our system a pretty realistic estimate of what it's going to cost us to operate next year, based on our current staffing levels, based on the collective bargaining agreements we have, based on inflation levels for sort of non-staff costs, projecting what we think fringe benefits might look like, all that. And we also looked at what we thought the sort of base level funding that the governor would provide based on what we requested last fall, and determined what the delta would be, and have asked for money to make up the difference. So a big component of our ask is, what do we need to keep the lights on and keep all of our existing programs and maybe not every single program, but our basic structure of our university and our current staffing levels, university and college, moving along with enough money to pay all of our expenses. That's about $1.8 billion over 7 years. It starts with that component is $130 million in year one, and that rises in the out years based on some assumptions about continuing to pay raises to our staff and faculty, and our continued efforts to and it also builds in a little bit of funding for us to begin to seed new programs. We calculated that based on the cost it would be for us to start up 30 programs, academic programs, in the university system over 5 years, and then what we thought the net cost of operating those programs would be. Ultimately, we're talking about, I assume if we launch new programs, that those would be programs that would be, well demanded by students and would ultimately be self-sustaining or provide net margin for the universities. But we built out a model that showed subsidy in the first number of years of each program's operation in order to ramp up enrollment and establish those programs as we go forward. So there's money for paying all of our bills as well as rolling out 30 new academic programs at the universities, and a similar number at the colleges, although the cost structure at the colleges is different. So I'm not sure that the number of courses is exactly right. Plus, it's a pretty high level model. So the exact uh, number of new courses or programs that we would be able to develop may be a little different, but I think that 30 gives you a reasonable order of magnitude of how many, what our investment in new programming would be under our 2030 plan. The last part is student supports. We put in 35 million, rising with inflation to about 45 million over the 7 years for student supports. So that's uh, split between the various parts of our system, and it would allow for a whole series of I mean, it would end up being probably about $4 million for each of the universities initially, and about 15 to $20 million for the college as a whole, for them to use for mental health for students, for other support programs to assist students and improve retention and the like, as well as some money to address some public safety concerns at some of the community college campuses where we believe we may need to enhance our provision of public safety for our students and faculty. And so the total 7 years of all those academic supports and academic programs and student supports is 2.1 billion. So the total cost of the program as we presented it is about 4.8 million, 4.7 billion. So that's a summary of what's in the program. We also have a comparison that I wanted to show you of what we think how our proposal financially compares to the governor's proposal. So I share this with you. Let me share my screen. How do I share my screen in WebEx? That's an interesting question. Okay.
Bottom row, Ben, right
Yep,
next to
I got it. I'm working. Is that working? Can you all see a little spreadsheet here that says year one FY24 at the top?
Yes.
Yep.
So this is the year one comparison. There's a couple of caveats. The governor included a really complicated fringe benefit proposal that we're still working through some of the necessary steps to evaluate that proposal in its complexity. Although it is designed and stated by the governor's budget proposal that it would be neutral to us in the year that it was implemented, because they would make a makeup payment in exchange for an increased fringe benefit costs, or make an adjustment downward to the block grant if our fringe costs were reduced. I don't think that they got the numbers right, but we're still working on that. So that's not included in this analysis. But as you can see, there is the total support for the CSCU in the current year is 452 million. The governor's proposal would go to 470 million in 24. Our recommendation was for 640 million in fiscal 24. So we are $169 million higher in our request than the governor's recommendation. Just so you can, the costs of each year's salary increases and associated fringe benefits under the CBAC agreement, just for comparison's sake, across our system, is about 60 or $65 million. So for the FY23 estimated at 450 to go up by $18 million when we have to assume an additional 60 or $65 million in costs, clearly puts us behind the 8 ball under the governor's proposal. I think our proposal is better. It's what we need to be, what we want to be. I think we've certainly tried to include resources to make a lot of improvements that the board, and I assume the faculty and the students would like us to make, and we're going to continue to, push for that number. In year two, I'll just scroll down and show you what year two looks like. It's a little worse. The governor proposed 430 million. Our proposal for year two was 714 million. The delta is quite large. Again, there's a difference of opinion about whether or not we should be backing off of our investment in higher education or moving ahead and doubling down. Obviously, we're on the doubling down side, and we're confident that we are right and confident that we will prevail. But it's going to be a bit of a scrap over the next several months to try to get where we want to be at the end of the day. So I will see if Sean has any comments, and then we'll take any questions you have.
Yeah, I think Ben did a great job of covering everything. Just a couple of quick points, because I know you all will probably have some questions, and I know Kalina and I have talked about this, is that, this proposal was really written for legislators, and it's meant to be kind of a starting point in our discussions and negotiations with them and the administration moving forward. So kind of everything is fungible and everything is movable and everything is negotiable. We understand legislators are going to have a very different, some case different, sometimes aligned, vision for where these investments should go, where they should be made, how they should look, and what year should they be implemented, how it will roll out. And we fully intend for this to be an ongoing conversation. This is kind of our vision and our opening salvo, but as Ben indicated on like the PAC expansion, Senate Democrats have put forward more of an A to B program for the CSUs, but there's interest from like House Democrats in doing it more, driven by, what majors are identified by Office of Workforce Strategy as in-demand areas. There's going to be continuing ongoing conversations with folks about, what do they want to invest in us, and, what is actually doable and wise on our part. So that is to just say kind of everything in here is kind of up for discussion. As we work with the legislature and the administration moving forward. We by no means expect, what we put forward to be the done deal. We know it's going to change. Anybody who puts forward a finished product to the legislature is, not exactly the wisest person. So that's one. The other piece is on, I think Ben touched on it, on kind of the difference of tone in the vision for public higher education. I will be careful because this is a public meeting about how I phrase this, so I will use other people's words to describe where the governor is versus us. But I think you'll see two very different visions, not just for our system, but for UConn as well, and kind of public higher ed. Between the governor and the legislature, you had folks like the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, Tony Walker, describe it as an abandonment of Connecticut and Connecticut public higher ed. You had folks like Speaker Ritter saying like, this is kind of a non-starter. We will absolutely be increasing investments for higher education. That is a priority for their caucus. Increasing the block grants for our constituent units is a caucus priority for Senate Democrats. You even had the Senate Minority Leader, Kevin Kelly, talking about the need to invest in our community colleges more, particularly for wraparound supports for first-generation students. So I think you really see a different vision from our side and from legislators than you're seeing out of the budget that came out from the administration on Wednesday. I think that's probably the politest way I can put that. So I think with that, we're happy to, Colleen, would you like us to jump into questions or?
Sure, absolutely. And I just want to throw in one bit of context as we ask questions, so we have it in our heads, is that, the appropriations hearing on a public higher ed is on Wednesday. And it begins, I believe, at this point at 7:30 p.m. So just keep that in mind. Brendan, and then Mike Shea.
Thank you for the work you're doing on this proposal. I do think it's the right thing to do for the state. It's the right thing to do for our campuses and also for our students. So I do appreciate the work you put into this. The question I have is, what was the assumption going into this proposal regarding the bond covenants that passed yesterday? So was there a strategy for a situation where those go in? Because it kind of sounds like that makes the job a lot harder, given, spending caps and that sort of thing that they just passed yesterday. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about that.
I believe that my assumption going in, and I think we talked about this as a complicating factor, was that those guardrails would be renewed. I think that the politics of the guardrails, to use the term that they're being described as, are very favorable, and they were widely credited with a turnaround in the state's finances, which I don't disagree with at all. They did result in that, and they provided some sort of external constraints on the legislature in recent years. I will say, though, that I haven't seen an analysis of the sort of budget framework, because the budget that was submitted by the governor assumed, I think, a maybe slightly different set of extensions. So there may be some variation that I haven't yet figured out. But my belief is that even under the guardrails structure that we have now, the fact that inflation grew quickly, which is one of the drivers to the appropriation cap, and because of the significant amount of increased funding, not only in the estimates and finals, which are largely diverted to the rainy day fund, but also in other major tax. I mean, our economy has been very strong, so sales taxes are strong. Inflation drives sales taxes. When inflation goes up 9%, so do sales taxes. So there's been strong tax receipts in other areas, and there is room my understanding from a preliminary analysis was that there is something like $1 billion of room under this new room under the spending cap, as a result of the New Year's calculations and the consensus revenue that the state is dealing with. So while we're asking for a lot of money, we're not asking for $1 billion a year. We're asking for I can't remember exactly what our 200 and a few $100 million a year in new appropriation. The remainder is all bond funds, which frankly aren't going to hit any of the state's ledger in terms of actual debt service for several years, and even then they will only be get layered into the state's debt service requirements very gradually, because it takes a long time to build buildings and expend those funds. So I think that we have the ability, the legislature has the ability to adopt a budget that includes the resources on the level we've requested, while still honoring the requirements of those caps. It makes it so that there are more choices they will have to make. I don't diminish that, and it makes it harder for them to do, but it does not make it impossible by any stretch of the imagination for the state to do what they want to do. I mean, from my experience working in state government, while these bond covenants and the guardrails that they have are real and meaningful, the state is a sovereign entity, and it can organize its expenditures in many, many ways. So, for instance, they could fund our PAC expansion, our expansion in financial aid for students, which would be a huge step forward in affordability for our students. They could fund that in any number of ways. They could do that off budget. They have plenty of folks I know in the legislature and in the governor's office who fully could come up with various ways to fund that off budget. They could take surplus money from this year. They could move it into an off budget fund, and have that fund provide support to financial aid for Connecticut students. A lot of states do it that way. It would not be unusual. And that would take it outside of the appropriations cap. So there are things that they could do, and that's only one idea. There are probably 10 other ways that if they want to support this program under the rules of these guardrails, the state has the ability to do that, in my opinion. And I don't think that the appropriations chairs, who know all these constraints perfectly well, is also, I don't believe that they are under the impression that this is anything other than one of many constraints that we have to address.
Yeah, and as a minor addendum to that, I'll just say, we've had 5 years as a state of working under these constraints that Tony and Kathy and others have had a few years to find some creative workarounds when they need to around this. So I don't think we're worried by any means, nor are Tony and Kathy, nor others in any of our conversations with them about our ability to fund this with the existing guardrails in place.
Well,
Thank you.
I agree.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to first of all thank you for both being here and presenting this to us, and also for the system office asking for that package. It's been so long since that's been done, and it seems backwards to me that that hasn't happened. So because it is an investment in the future for the state. I understand it's an argument. There's a lot of investments in the future, but I'm just so glad to see the system office making this one so hard and so strongly. Second, I want to say that. I really appreciate, I think we're lucky to have you, Ben, with your kind of forthrightness with us, and also your experience in the state government. That's really helpful. So again, thank you for doing this for us. And I realize the third thing is I realize this is a public forum, uh, as Sean was saying earlier, but I still want to ask how you might answer a question like this. I don't understand quite I think it was OPM. The tone in the news reports I've read that came out of OPM was sort of like blaming the universities for not, handling the money well or something. With the, I understand with the COVID funds and all that, but I mean, do you think it's that tone of that was very unpleasant? And I wondered, do you think they're mistaken about that and they might change their mind based on the fact that they misunderstood, or do you think they really think that the CSU is wasting money somehow or not planning well?
Well, you're challenging my diplomacy.
Yes, and I understand that. And if you,
That's all right. I will preface my remarks by saying that I think that that they I think that they are wrong. I think that the that we all have our challenges. That there are. I mean, I'm not going to stand in front of any group and say that CSCU has been, flawlessly managed over any period of time. We're a big, sprawling organization with 11,000 employees and 60,000 students across 20 or more locations, and we are. There are opportunities I mean, if you want to go and poke around, you can find things that are wasteful. Because higher education, like hospitals or any other big complicated human endeavor, is inherently wasteful as we deal with, educating people or other sorts of things that people do. I think that to call us out as having, I think fundamentally we should take the governor at his word in his budget address that he believes that the CSCU should have begun to reduce our our expenditures, shall we say, to shrink, starting years ago, even before the pandemic, that we should have seen the demographic writing on the wall and said there aren't as many high school students, and so we should shrink because the demand is down, and we should reduce the supply to match the demand. And I believe that that is an honestly held view of the governor. He says it in his budget report, and I'll take him at his word. And I think that that is driving. I think that that translates into some frustration on their part that we didn't do that. That we didn't. Now, I will remind everyone that we actually have reduced our size meaningfully over recent years. If you look, our employment is down a little bit. We certainly, like last year when there was a pretty high amount of attrition, mostly in staff, but even in faculty, higher than normal attrition at the end of 22, that we haven't rushed to fill all those jobs because we are aware that our enrollment is down now. But I think that generally the position of the Board of Regents, the current Board of Regents, and I would argue even the Board of Regents that came before them that you weren't as always as enamored with, were committed to building a system that met the changing needs of Connecticut students, rather than simply saying, well, the number of traditional high school age kids is down, so we should just be shrinking. I don't think that anybody thinks that that's the right solution inside of CSCU, and nobody's thought that for a long time. And I think that this budget reflects an effort to redirect us toward that more austere vision for higher education, which President Chang and the Board of Regents and Sean and I are all don't think is the right direction.
Well,
And also-
you still have your diplomacy medal. And can I just ask one other thing? The thing that was ironic about that shrinking was that we were already under-resourced to work with the students that we need to work with that are unprepared. So when it was shrinking, we actually ironically had more resources because there were fewer students. So, I mean, I understand that, I mean, I don't know, that argument should be made that even when we were fully funded, we were under-resourced because the students are particularly underprepared. And you know, this is the institution that will give those people a college education. Now, other places aren't going to do that. And I don't understand why they don't understand how hard that is and why that takes a lot of personnel. You can't just put 200 people in a room and deliver a bunch of information. You're working one-on-one with a lot of these students with their reading, writing, and thinking skills. And that's expensive. Just there's no way about it. So I mean, I think you all know that. I just hope somebody can help the governor understand that.
You know, like I'll add to that. Like that is an argument we have tried vociferously to make that because you'll see them often point to with very skewed charts and data on, you know, our enrollment challenges. You know, they point to our peak kind of post-08 recession and fail to realize like that's an abnormal year, just as the COVID years are abnormal years. Same thing when they try to show how generous they've been in our funding. They start immediately after the 17 CBAC deal when we got a big boost in state spending and leave out the years before that where it was cut. But we have tried making the case that when they bring up enrollment, like, you know, how our operating funds have been flat since 07, even pre, you know, creation of the Board of Regents, that when you have an operating fund that's been flat for that long, at the same time that the operating fund that is making it to campuses is further compressed by inflationary pressure, you know, CBAC wage and fringe benefit increases and the like, that you can't be making the investments that are not kind of the direct cost of instruction and the things that like are right in front of us, whether it's concurrent enrollment, dual enrollment programs, community outreach programs, all the things that we know that are kind of ancillary to the immediate cost of instruction that are going to be a help for bringing students in the door and reaching more and more students, that you haven't been able to make those investments as much as you would like to over the years because of that compression. And that has not been received, or it has been acknowledged and not kind of agreed to, despite how many times we have tried to make that. So I think there's just at certain points a difference of opinion and a difference of value on what we do and our mission. And you can see that as you pointed out, in the narrative in that budget, especially in the comparisons of us to the privates. You know, there's a kind of acknowledgement that the private's enrollment is growing while ours are shrinking, and that is a good thing somehow for Connecticut or Connecticut students. And I think I don't think I'm speaking out of turn by saying I think everyone on this call would vociferously disagree with that. But nevertheless, that is the position of that budget, at least.
Well, again, thanks for being here and for doing the work for us. Appreciate it.
Can I just jump in with a story too? Because I have had an advisee come into my office last week. They are an undocumented student. They've concluded that they've been advised that they may have ADHD. They cannot access the services to get tested for that, and they cannot qualify for accommodations, reasonable accommodations for their learning. And I'm here, an economist, trained to teach that, trying to figure out how to help this student, right? And we need more resources to make that happen. We're not talking about somebody at a private university that can afford $40,000 or $50,000 a year out of a checking account and have all the healthcare access they want and all the psychological testing that they want. This is a major challenge that people need to understand, and it's a growing challenge specifically within our system. So I thank you for telling those stories. Those stories are real, and this is important work that we're doing.
David.
Yeah, I think we need to recognize the importance of CSU 2030 in the context of that joint meeting we had with the Board of Regents on full funding for higher education. And clearly this is a consistent with and perhaps a response to, or at any rate, parallel to that discussion. And so it's important for us to fully support this proposal. I do have a number of questions. My comparison has been based on the CSCU 2030 proposal and the governor's proposal. And I note that, so the numbers that I have are a little bit different from the ones that Ben just put up on screen. But I noted that in the 2030 proposal, and consistent with the previous biennial budget, the legislation approved 317 million in the 2023 year, exclusive, of course, of all the money that came in from the federal COVID funds. And that what the governor had proposed, I'm referring here to page 25 of his proposal, was to take the total of 195 million, which came in from federal COVID funds, and provide half of that in the 2024 year, and then a half of that half in the 2025 as what they call a continuation of temporary operating support to sort of, I suppose the metaphor might be, wean us off the federal COVID money, right? And that explains the $414 million amount in the governor's proposal for 2024, although the increase is only 8.5 million for 2025, and it should be, according to the continuation support, 48.8. So that's a question I have. I'm not sure that you would have the answers to that. But I also note, obviously, as you said, there's a big difference between what the CSCU 2030 proposal is asking for and what the governor is proposing. And for 2024, the difference, the increase that was being asked was a $226 million baseline increase, or a 71% increase. And again, for 24 to 25, relative to 24, a $56 million increase, or 10%. So the difference from the governor's proposal for 2024, I calculated as 129 million, and for 2025 as 174, for a total of $303 million difference for the biennial. I hope those figures are the correct ones. So the question I have is, how in the CSCU 2030 proposal did we justify the additional funds requested? That is to say, the $226 million for 2024 and the additional $56 million for 2025. I didn't see that in the CSU proposal, and I'm sort of hoping that, as this is just a first statement of it, that can be fleshed out, and some of it may be coming from the legislators, some of it may be coming in succeeding years. So that was the first point that I wanted to make. I also note that there is a $6.5 million appropriation for Guided Pathways Advisors, which responds to a question I've been asking for a long time, which is, how are they going to be paid for? And there seems to be a proposal for at least the next 2 years, whereas the PAC proposal is $15 million. Again, page 26 of the governor's proposals. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done to explain to the legislator, and I think also to the governor, the added value and the specific programs. Ben, you mentioned 30 new programs at the universities. That caught my attention, as did the statement in the CSCU proposal that some programs will be developed as consortial degrees with faculty from multiple campuses coming together to teach collaboratively online degrees. These new online consortial degrees will provide increased opportunities for students from all corners of the state. So, Ben, my final question here is, I presume you're talking about that when you talk about 30 new degrees. Is that just a ballpark number, or are there specific degrees?
I think that there may be overlap between those two concepts, but in addition to the issue of consortial degrees, I'm not really an expert on it. I know that there's a process that RAI is working through to begin to address delivery of existing or new programs through a consortial model online, and that is out there. But in this request, RAI and I developed a sort of high-level model that says, all right, if we want to start a new program, it will require 4 full-time faculty members, and that it will eventually serve this many students. It will take this many years for the enrollment to get to the level it would get to, and we will have this amount of, like we've added in some marketing expenses in the beginning, and we sort of built a pro forma of what the life cycle funding level would be of us kicking off a new academic program. And that we then, layered in a whole series of those. I think we built in 30 over, like I said, 5 years, I believe, sort of the start. So they wouldn't all start at once. It was like the big starts were in the second and third year. But we assumed if we said we have money to start some new programs, let's get some, that would go into the process that you all are more familiar with than I am of working with faculty to identify those programs. And to look for students programs that we think will attract students, and to begin to develop those. So we included money for that. We assume that I know that you've heard the administration and the system talk about the need for program review in order to make sure that we're offering the programs that students want to be in. Maybe that's not the only thing we're doing, but shame on us if there are a whole bunch of students going to UNH because they offer a program that we don't offer, that is in high demand. And so we've built in money for us to begin to identify those high demand programs and implement new academic programs, including hiring faculty to teach those programs. I think we assume that some of the faculty and existing faculty would be involved in them as well. Obviously, that would come from existing faculty, but we assumed that we would be hiring 4 faculty members, at sort of the beginning of the pay scale for starting faculty members in each program, and the assumptions about students. Now, obviously, those assumptions will all be wrong because you can't come up with a model that will accurately describe 30 separate academic programs built over a time period. But we thought it was a fair way to build in enough resources that would give us the flexibility to start rolling out new programs in order to develop our enrollment and to meet our mission. But I talked to Rai about this, and he said, well, some of those programs might be offered on a consortial basis, if that makes sense. But those are separate ideas. The consortial model is a model of offering courses. This is a question of asking for resources to implement whole new programs in order to make sure that our offerings are the right ones for the circumstances in which we find ourselves, to meet student demand and to address workforce demand and to address changing interests in academia. So we do include that. It's not the same as the consortial, although we acknowledge that they may overlap.
Yeah, I would just add that, that's an area where I think we need to have considerable discussion. Do you have an estimate of the total cost of those 30 new programs over 5 years? Does that include? That's not specified. That would be part of the overall increase in base level operating funds that you're asking for. I understand that.
Yes. Well, we didn't. We also projected that new programs would make money. Like, we weren't proposing that we start new programs that we think are, will not attract students. So they do have students in them. So, looking at the model that we have, it was 30 new programs. We sort of divided them into some, mostly in, business, engineering, computer science, education, STEM, healthcare. Like, it was based on areas of workforce demand and student interest that Rai provided as a basis. But we're not committed to any particular distribution other than we came up with sort of a model so that we can describe what the impact might be. So based on our model, we think we would produce by 2037 was when we anticipate that all those programs would be fully up and running and, on a stable basis enrolled, that we would be producing something like 3,000, just under 3,000 graduates across the various fields out of those programs in whatever that is, 15 years or so. So we do have some ability to say what the model reflects in terms of costs and margins. I think the cost of running a degree program ended up being well, how many programs? It ended up being about $1.1 million, but then that sort of inflates over time as the faculty become, you know, people make more money over time, and that's mostly what our business is. There's a little dip at the beginning because we put in, we front loaded some funding for marketing and you know startup costs of a program. In terms of how much of that goes back into the number, I can try to find that out for you. I think as I recall, my recollection of how we built that in is we built in all the costs during the first few years, but then starting in like, I can't remember whether it's a fourth or fifth year, I began offsetting that by the anticipated revenue from new students. So, but in the first few years, while we're just rolling out the programs, the entire cost of those programs. So I think like in the first year, $6 million of the total request would be for new programs. And then it goes to 12 or 14 the next year. And so, but then after that, we begin to assume that those programs would become more self-sustaining with tuition and other resources.
And in your model, would each of these programs be offered based at one of the universities, or would it be some consortium of the universities, or would it be some other agency?
The model doesn't really speak to that. They would be offered through the universities. Now, like I said, that does not rule out that the universities could offer those programs on a consortial basis with their fellow sister universities. That is not, the model doesn't care. This assumes that all the faculty members are going to be AAUP members and that all of the, well, at least that's how we develop the price based on the AAUP pay scale. We also added a similar amount into the colleges, but to be honest, we were, you know, we didn't bother to create a separate model for how program development at the colleges would occur. You know, but we assumed that a similar process would unfold, and that we would be able to use, you know, that the basic underlying economics of starting up new programs would not be wildly different at the colleges, although the pace at which we would produce graduates would be quicker because they would be shorter programs.
Well, that's certainly something to think about, and I think we'll have opportunity to come back and to discuss the parameters and the procedures. The last point I just want to make is it seems to me there's a discrepancy in the governor's budget, because when I add the numbers for the baseline from previous baseline of 317 and the 97.7 million continuation of temporary operating funds, it comes up to his total of 414. But for the 25 year, it seems to be short. It's just something I just want to draw to your attention. There's only an $8.5 million increase, but according to the continuation of temporary operating support, there should be a $48.8 million increase. I just leave that for you to sort of ponder over and get back to me on that. I'd appreciate it.
That's an easy one. That's the fringe benefit proposal that they've layered in is $41 million, I believe. So there's a back and forth. It's intended to be revenue neutral. They're using outdated numbers, so currently it isn't. So what you'll see in the numbers Ben's presented is he strips out their kind of back and forth 41 million on the fringe to normalize it, so we can actually look at what's the impact to our block grant outside of this proposal on. So the 10-second version of the fringe benefit proposal is sticking us with the healthcare and active employee benefits portion of the fringe and taking on the legacy fringe portion. So the only portion that, according to the ADEC tables, are projected to go down into the out years, and leaving us with the healthcare portion, which is projected to only go up into the out years. there's a whole bunch of that is intended to be revenue neutral and is intended to help us in UConn with the fringe benefit rate. We understand the intent. The numbers are slightly different, but Ben has stripped that out for ease of comparison. So I think if you look at the numbers he has shared, like that's probably a more accurate representation of the impact than what you're going to see in the document that OPM produced.
Good. Could you just forward that to those numbers?
Yes, it was distributed. I will be happy to send it to you, but it was shared pretty widely on Tuesday. But I'll send it. I'll send it to you and to Colina for the. I mean, this is our public document. The one thing there is going to be a discrepancy in that I have backed out this $41 million out of the block grants that the governor proposed, because he said he was going to be making it. Well, it's about 39 million in the college and about 2 million in the universities, and Charter Oak is actually a negative. The governor's proposal was that these payments were necessary for the proposal to be cost neutral to us, because presumably, even though we would pay $41 million more in costs under his rearranging of the fringe benefit responsibilities, but that they would give us an additional 41 million so that it was neutral to us. But in my view, you can't then consider that as part of the block grant as a growth in our state assistance, because when somebody says, here's $41 million, and oh, by the way, here's $41 million in new expenses you have to pay, you can't count that as growth in resources. That's just, moving the deck chairs around. But they put the movement of deck chairs in with the block grant numbers, which I identified to them before the budget came out was slightly misleading, but apparently they didn't agree or were comfortable with their presentation. So my numbers are a little different from what's reported in the governor's budget book because I backed that out.
Okay, thanks.
Mike.
Can I just say, Ben, that last story you told is part of what makes me, OPM seems, again, kind of, I don't know, like peaked at, or like, I don't know, they just seem kind of like snide or something about, if you're pointing it out to them, that's not hard to understand. I understand it. I'm just trying to figure out, are they just kind of anti education on this, or do they think they're really doing the right thing? It just sounds so petty. And even the tone in the newspaper and stuff was all that kind of, I don't know, it didn't sound very professional in a way. So I'm just asking, when you pointed that out to them, they just ignored it in a sense, right? The 41 million for fringe plus.
Well, I was speaking to staff. I was speaking to staff. It was I think a friendly audience. These are people I know and have known for years. And I said, I think this is disingenuous to present it this way. And they said, I kind of see your point. We'll take a look. They tend to be a little, vague about what they're going to actually do. They're working for the governor, not for me. I understand that. I mean, they could have presented this way and just put a little footnote and said, 41 million of this is going to go to pay for fringe benefits.
Yeah.
But they didn't, that would have been okay, I guess. I would have preferred that they sort of take it all off budget, separate it out and have a separate line for it. So it was quite clear what they were doing. But,
okay, thanks.
But we'll leave the commentary to you, Mike. I think you have the flexibility to say that where we have to maintain, I think, Ben's diplomacy.
I totally understand that.
All right. Well, are there any more questions? Thank you. And thank you for being super ambitious this time. Let's hope we can get this narrative turned around. And I'll just remind everyone that Appropriations is hearing public testimony on this 7 p.m. And I put the link in at 7 p.m. on February 15th, Wednesday. And I put the link in the chat. So, we have the opportunity to tell those stories that, Ben and Sean might not be able to tell as specifically. So thanks again, folks. Yes.
And just a quick plug, an addendum to that, our student panels are up at 5 o'clock. Our students will be virtual, so you can watch them live on YouTube, on CTN. We've pulled together some really compelling stories for our students across the system, as we always do. But that is my favorite day of the year is hearing our students speak to the approach committee about the importance of the opportunities that we provide. And if you're interested, our agency portion will be in the morning. I think 11 or 11:30. It's OHE first at 10 or 10:30, followed by us, followed by UConn. I think UConn's between us and a lunch break. But those will be in person. So if you feel like showing up and watching that, or you want to watch that online, feel free to. I know UConn will be churning out their students in droves later that night. So, or I should say UConn undergraduate student government will be. So.
Yeah. All right. Thank
Thank
you
you very
again.
much. Have a great weekend.
You too. All right. So next on the agenda is follow up on department chairs, but I'm just going to note so we don't forget that I forgot to put chair and vice chair reports on here, and David and I have both attended an ASA and a finance committee respectively. So we'll have to throw them in under old and new. Okay. All right. So follow up on department chairs. What was the sort of temperature out there? Are folks willing to participate in a little working group on what kinds of either feedback or recommendations or, questions we can forward about the role of department chairs? I know that heard from Jen and I think Mary Beth. Jen, are you there? I know she's multitasking during this meeting. Okay, so I know that Jen has said that they're
Sorry,
go
I'm
ahead.
trying on my computer now. Can you repeat the last thing you just said?
Oh, I was just asking about the level of interest across the community colleges to have this little working group on department chairs. And I know you'd said there's interest at Three Rivers.
Yes, I'm sorry. And if someone in our larger group decides to participate on subcommittee, I'm on sabbatical, but I do have contacts of people who've been doing some of this work and have been thinking hard about it. So I'm definitely someone like I can have conversations with people and connect them with people who've done some of this work already. But I just can't serve on the committee because I have to write a sabbatical project. Okay. Thanks.
And you're here. Thank you. Anyone else? I think
Kalina, this is Mary Beth. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I did not get any feedback from my campus. So you had said you thought you got something for me, but I haven't gotten any feedback. I have a request out. I haven't heard anything back yet. So that's where I'm at.
Matthew and then John.
I sent out something to the department chairs on my campus, and they expressed interest in, hold on, let me find the wording here. They expressed interest in participating in developing these descriptions. So there was some positive feedback, and we also were sent a copy of the existing description on Wednesday from our dean, campus dean.
Nice. John?
Same, I sent out, a request and explained what we were doing, and I did not get a response. I don't know, I'm a department chair too, a new department chair this year. And I think certainly people want to be involved in the conversation, but are leery of adding something else, another committee or subcommittee to their plate. And I'm kind of in that position too. So, it sort of depends on what's involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I should follow up too, because I sent out one request, did not get a response, and I could certainly follow up with my colleagues as well.
Okay. So it's okay, Ron?
Kalina, I guess I had chairs that were working with 4Cs and with the unions on this, and then I guess the management decided they wanted to take a break from negotiations on impact with department chairs, and that whole thing stopped. So I guess my question is, how is what you're asking us, how does that differ from what was already happening in terms of department chairs working through the unions on this issue?
So my impression is that the unions have reached sort of the end of their sort of appropriate participation in this, in the sense that, are we preserving these roles, right? And this compensation? Yes, that's a union issue. But what role these now department chairs that used to make sense in the old system will play in the new system, I think that's more of a governance issue. And honestly, it would be possibly better for this to go through the new Senate, but that is not yet functional, and we are currently scheduling for the fall. So it would just be nice to have that conversation that at least could contribute. We could pass what we find along to Senate, etc., and just get this conversation going. So that was the thought.
I disagree that it shouldn't be part of negotiations. I think the biggest problem we've had throughout all the time that I've been working both with the union and with chairs is that our contracts do not have a comprehensive definition of chair duties. So that allows management to constantly pile new duties on top of them without increasing compensation. So I very much believe that clear cut, clear definitions of chair duties needs to be contractual. That needs to be in the contract.
Right. So that, and John, is your hand up again or just left over? Okay. So that doesn't sort of preclude us from having a discussion about this as a different body that could then provide input to the unions also. The question is just what the will of the group is, right? So why don't do we want to take just sort of quick poll vote on whether or not we want to move forward with this? My vision would be that we would get at least one person from large, small, and medium to do a little subcommittee and get department chairs together maybe once or twice before the next meeting, write up some feedback, and come back if we were to participate in this conversation at all. Just because we are a forum that allows for that kind of reach out in the absence of one right now. And so the question is, do we see that as a worthwhile effort? Do we want to kick it over back to the unions? How do we want to do it? So who's interested in continuing to put together a group to provide some sort of feedback on department chairs? All right. Poll taken. It'll sort itself out. Okay. Let's move on. FAC conference. Lois, do you want to jump in here?
I don't know what to say. I reached out to Robin. This was a couple of weeks ago. She was only available the 14th in the afternoon. I sent her an email earlier this week apologizing for not getting back to her. I didn't hear back from her, so at this point, I wouldn't count on the fact that she's still available on the 14th of April. So I don't know.
Well, the question I thought we were bringing to the group was whether or not, so the 14th of April is our scheduled meeting, yes? And because there's limited availability in April, and because it was the date of our meeting, we're going to ask the group whether we were willing to use that date, not for a meeting, but for the conference. And then if we need a meeting that month, we can always call a special, topic meeting, emergency meeting if we need it. But we would give over our meeting time to the conference. So I assumed that Robin was holding that for us.
I didn't ask her to hold it because we didn't have anything specific in mind, so I just had gotten days from her. And as I said, when I went back last week and mentioned and said something earlier this week, whenever it was, and said something about the 14th, I did not hear back from her.
All right, well, to give you the ability to say something definitive, what's the position of this group on giving up our April meeting for the conference? If we can get Robin, if she's still available. How many of you are in favor of having that option? Okay. All right. Okay. It looks like most of us are good with that. Any strong objections, or shall we proceed?
But can I just say that I'm just looking at the email I sent her. I sent it to her last Saturday, and she has not responded. And I said something about if I think there's still some question about doing the conference on the 14th instead of the 21st. However, I know there are some issues with that, so on and so forth. I will get those in charge. And she, as I said, she hasn't responded. So I wouldn't change the date because of her necessarily, because she hasn't responded to me.
We're not changing anything. We're holding it as a possibility. Confirm with her that we're able to do it on the 14th. If she says yes, it's a go. If she doesn't respond, we have our meeting date. So no big deal.
Okay.
All right. Okay, and the next item I think is something that you requested. Oh, sorry, Andre, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I missed the last meeting, I guess, and if I may, I have a question about the previous item of chairs, and what duties they should have, or how do we define them? Was that the question? Is that what we're trying to discuss?
It's not so much the job description, though that needs work also. It is how in the new CSCC system, where the org chart was built without department chairs, we integrate department chairs into that org chart, because not all departments at the colleges work well with the new dean, schools structure system, right? So you've got departments that are split between schools. You have department chairs who are now coordinating between two different deans and two different schools with two different sets of policies. And the question is, how do you work that in, and what is the process? So that was the real issue, because they were a last minute addition because of the union's work to sort of negotiate them back in. We had always been opposed to it, but it wasn't until the very last moment that they were put back in. But they have not really been integrated. We're just saying department chairs continue to exist.
Okay, well, because I still don't quite understand that, because the system that they're designing, the chairs would not be evaluating faculty. They would be, I don't think they were going to be hiring anybody. So what else is there? I mean, academics, I suppose, academic leadership. It's about it, right?
Right, right. And there are no departments, really. Sorry, go ahead, Maribeth.
The department chairs on my campus were told that they will be signing timesheets starting in the fall.
And that's about it?
That's a big.
That was like the, I think, including obviously academics, but that was like a new piece that seemed was not something that was done on our campus in the past. Our department chairs have never been the ones to do timesheets.
Oh, see, at our campus, they have. See, this is the interesting thing we discovered through the union conversation. It's so completely different at every campus. So, Matthew.
On our campus, the concern seems to be that there's expanded duties because our departments are starting the semester lost administrative assistants. So a lot of the administrative work that had been done in the department by by an administrative assistant with oversight with the department chair is now being put on just the department chair. So there's this expansion of responsibilities, which is a lot of just administrative work.
Okay. It's also really interesting the scheduling work that they're doing, given that there's now a staff of what, 3, soon to be 6, scheduling at the CSCC level. I'm not sure how that interaction is going to work and where decisions are actually going to get made, right? Is that correct? I may have misspoken, but I believe that that's true. Okay, but we decided not to put together a group on this. Watch it play out, heckle from the sidelines. Okay. So are we done with this discussion? Should we move on to?
I mean, the problem is that, you know, we can go ahead and discuss this and come up with all kinds of ideas, but they're just going to be junked by whoever it is that makes the decisions in Hartford. I mean, you know, it's obviously an important thing, and I think we ought to weigh in on it. But is anybody going to listen? Does anybody give a shit?
Probably not, but I mean, it is. If we want to take on the responsibility of entering the conversation, it's something we can do.
Yeah, I think I got too much already.
Okay. Yeah. And again, there is a governance structure being erected for the community colleges, so they can take it on. We don't have to. Yeah, Ron.
Again, Kalina, I think the unions, with legal representation, need to take this on because again, if it gets written down in the contract, then it's real. Okay. If management just promises us stuff and just agrees to stuff, we've seen repeatedly that when push comes to shove, they just go back on their word. So this needs to be a legal issue, and that's why I think it needs to be done through the unions.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, Ed Tech. Lois, take it away.
Um, I'm not sure what I should be talking about.
Oh, I'm not sure either. I thought you asked for this as an agenda item.
No, I just asked for, I think, you know, maybe support on the letter that we wrote about the charge, the ed tech charge. I'm not gonna, I don't necessarily have to press that.
Okay, so you'd like to just forego it? Do you want to share the letter with the group?
Sure. Well, it would have to be shared, the charge, the original charge written by the clowns in the clown college would have to be shared as well as the response.
Okay, so we'll share as an informational item with the group after the meeting that there is, could you at least characterize the issue? What's changing about ed tech? And
Well,
what's the concern?
the changing issue is some of the colleges have ed tech specialists working with them, the ed tech directors, and presumably what's happening, I believe, is the ed tech specialists are being moved into academic IT, whatever that means, academic IT, and there's like 3 levels, academic IT 1, 2, and 3, and I guess the ed tech specialists are going into academic IT 2, which is an equivalent grade. And they will not be, it's very cloudy. They'll not be working with the ed tech directors who they now report to necessarily. They'll be part of a help desk or something or other. And what I was talking about mostly with, I don't have an ed tech specialist working for me. I've just got me. What I was involved in was the ed tech charge for the ed tech directors or the ed tech council was drafted by, I guess, what's her name? O'Day Stevens. I have no idea what her title is. And then Maya, I have no idea what her title is either, and Manuel Gomez somehow were involved in it, and it was sent to the academic deans for their approval. We never saw it until it was presented to the academic deans, and the only reason we saw it then was because it was sent to us by somebody. And so we wrote a joint response that I actually wrote, and everybody signed, that the Ed Tech Council signed off on, and it was sent back to them. They were supposed to respond by today. I didn't expect a response and haven't gotten one. So, I guess what I was just looking for when I sent it to you, Kalina, was more of a resolution supporting what we did or something like that. Supporting the content of our response, saying that it wasn't collaborative, it wasn't anything, and it was rather badly worded, nasty.
So I apologize. I didn't realize that's what you were looking for, but
That's okay.
I
That's okay.
thought you were giving us an update. So yeah, I mean, I guess we can keep an eye on what's going on. Revisit it next time. And to what extent is this I'm assuming unions are involved in this, right? It's a real
The
restructuring.
unions are involved in the ed tech specialist issues. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll return to it, I suppose. Thanks. All right. Western, Rob, I know that you weren't prepared for it, but you did send a document. We could do this today or next time, but
This is fine.
all right.
I'm just going to sort of do a quick overview of the language that came from the provost to the president of the University Senate to give a kind of a concluding notion about how the motion to discontinue was resolved. And so if that's helpful, I'm happy to do it. The memo is I sent to David and you, and I don't know if it got circulated, but that did go out.
Oh, very helpful. And I'll make sure the document gets around. I'm not sure that I did send it around, but yeah, an overview would be great.
Okay. Well, as you all probably remember, there were two programs that were initially up for discontinuance, with given 60 days to make the case for themselves, coming on top of everything else we're doing. So we were working full tilt boogie, as they say, and with the help of the union, no doubt, got a lot of students involved, and we met with numerous bodies talking about it and so on. So where we are is that in meteorology, the BS degree in meteorology is going to be redesigned as a 4+1 program. So there'll be the BS 4, and then the one would be getting an MS degree. And the idea here is that by dividing the degree into two levels, the BA will be for building skills in calculus and physics and introduce some work associated with atmospheric and oceanic sciences. And then the MS degree will address modeling and other skills that are necessary to meet the National Weather Service standards for meteorology. I'm speaking from the text here because this is not my area at all. But what's good about it is that this program was up for dismissal last year. They fought back. It was continued. This was a second approach, and they managed to convince the Senate, and institution is responding this way. I want to make a point here that it's where some of us are interested, that this memo that arrived to us all, dated January 17th, came from our provost and vice president for academic affairs, but thus far there's been no communication on this from the president himself, who is here to lead this financial crisis through reform and discontinuance. Not that we should read anything significant into that, but it is interesting, because that's why he's here. Anyway, So the Department of Physics, Astronomy, and Meteorology, so-called PAM, P-A-M, is going to join the Department of Biology now. And that interdisciplinary model they have in mind, they being the administration, I guess, is to sort of inform the degrees in modeling and climate science, and revise meteorology so that the interdisciplinary nature of it would review general education curriculum associated with the program. Now, curiously to me, and that's my editorial comment, supposedly this was to lead to immediate savings, which were described as a reduction of administrative costs and through the elimination of one department chair. Now, we all know the department chairs, I don't know, it's $300 or $400 for the year, but they're talking mostly here about the release time for those chairs in terms of course load. So it's probably as much as 3 courses each semester that would be back in the curriculum. And that's seen as obviously a financial saving. But even that, given what we demonstrated in terms of at least what they're demonstrating in terms of other things they do in terms of the climate lab and so on, they felt that this was, the administration felt that that would be a positive change. They anticipate a reduction in the cost of the program delivery, which they say is the most expensive at the university. That's parenthetical. Increasing enrollments in newly designed degrees. All of this is prospective. And the new curriculum would be brought through governance in the fall of this fall and launched in the fall of 24. So the current BS in meteorology will admit students for 1 more year before the beginning the teach out and launch of the new degree, and the BS-MS strategy will be evaluated in 4 years. Now, the evaluation continues to be this talk about enrollments, and the sort of conclusion is that the preponderance of low enrolled courses in these degrees will mean that they will be closed. That's the final summary. That comes from the provost directly. I don't know of the conversation and I don't even know if the department agreed that that would lead to their closure. But that was at least her, as I see it, summary of the longer term sense of this. Incidentally, in the Department of the Meteorology defense of their program before the Senate, they pointed to the same item that was just talked about. Here we have a program that is distinct to this area, and it would mean that students would go to other universities if they could not count on it being here. So that's part of their defense. In the social sciences, we have the social science department, as probably some of you know, is anthropology, sociology, economics, political science, and geography. Geography not being a major, but a program that answers the education department's need for its students who are going to be teachers in the state of Connecticut to have had geography. And we do not have a faculty appointment in that anymore. It disappeared when one of our tenured folk decided to work elsewhere, and it's never been replaced. So we teach it with part-timers. In any case, there was also a degree in social sciences, which we had introduced some years ago as a way of handling students who transferred in from other institutions, were probably heading towards teaching in social studies, and this was a way that they could take history from the history department, and with that and social sciences requirements, and with a degree in social sciences, and take that into perhaps teaching social studies. It also was a way for people who didn't have a career track but just wanted to finish the degree to be able to do so with a fair amount of history also. That program, therefore, however, did not actually cost anything because the social sciences courses were being taken by faculty who were appointed in the other disciplines. But this was decided that the administration wanted to close that degree. No students will be admitted for the fall. And although, as they say, it's a low cost degree, it's not a strong recruiter, they felt, to grow with opportunities that would be available in the other disciplines remaining, which is the bridge to what happened to Aunt Soch. The BA in anthropology sociology will continue, but we had been working, in fact, had been working for a year and a half before this whole fiscal crisis was introduced to us in February. Um, that were developing a social justice track and a policy and global studies track for the social sciences degree. That will now be folded into the BA in anthropology sociology. We were pretty much the primary movers in that reform anyway. So that is where that social sciences, at least that element of it, is going to still exist. The requirement now that what we're charged with is reconsidering our program, which we're doing actively each week. We're still meeting. We're going to increase applied learning opportunities. We're working on the idea of a Connecticut Futures Lab, which will build on what it is we have done for many years in our archaeology program, but adding contemporary issues in Connecticut Futures. And we're hoping to do that through collaboration with the Washington Institute for American Indian Studies and also for other, perhaps, programs that would be affiliated with us. But that's all in the reimagining stage. We're meeting to design that as a way to meet this notion of applied learning and folding applied learning internships into the degree as one of the tracks that students could choose. The provost wants us to work on our scheduling, which we're working very hard on. We're thinking about moving from a 2-year rotation of courses to a 3-year rotation by way of maybe filling up classes more. Again, this issue of number of majors plagues us, even though many of our courses in the 200 to 400 level are filled with students from other disciplines who are taking our courses as part of a general education upper division requirement. But that seems not to in any way matter in this discussion. For example, a medical anthro course I teach, we might have 16, 17 people from other disciplines, and then 3 or 4 from within the social sciences. So, but that's irrelevant because it doesn't bring majors, and that's what the administration is going on. It's the Board of Regents initiative up here about low enrollment majors has nothing to do with general education service, which we, as a department, provide more than any other department in the university. But that is not part of this conversation at all, as far as we can tell, even though we've tried to push it. So, BA in political science, they were taken off the so-called parked list, which meant they were vulnerable in 3 years for the same discontinuance. They're off that list now. They're charged with developing, again, more applied learning opportunities, as is the ANSOC program, and build it into the program. And they're urged to collaborate more closely with history and the Justice and Law Administration in the pre-law advisory group so that those opportunities would be available for those pursuing advanced degrees in law and politics. The BA in economics. I'm going through fast here. If any questions, you're welcome to ask. But the BA in economics will continue. At least that was the language. But it's going to be offered by being moved to the Department of Finance at the Ansel School. For some years, one of the members of the economics faculty here has noticed that we're one of the 4 sister institutions that doesn't have that combination of economics within finance. So he's not opposed to that. The other 2 colleagues seem to be willing for the move. We're concerned about that because in our undergraduate program in all of the disciplines, we have a senior thesis, which is a substantial research, both quantitative or qualitative or combined. And we found that our economics students have been very helpful in terms of lab work with each other and students in other disciplines for doing quantitative work. But we may be able to work that out with one of the faculty members in economics continuing to work with us. We have faculty who can do that in political science as well. But the program, shortly after this proposal, the economics faculty received a proposal from the chair of the finance department without consultation with them, which immediately proposed that this would all be part of the Bachelor's in Business Administration program. So that's being negotiated now. Right now, my economics colleagues are meeting at this very moment to talk about their feelings about that. But I think the original idea was that degree in economics would continue. And many of us in social sciences believe that regardless of where it is, there should be a degree in economics at the university. Whether that, how that will line up, we're still figuring it out. Economics was encouraged to reimagine the degree to include some upper level courses that are already offered in the BBA program, so that might happen. Anticipated reduction in cost here was the cost of instruction, decreasing low enrollment courses through program revision, better scheduling. And this will also, they believe, overall reduce reliance on part-time faculty. One of the reasons we're so reliant on part-time faculty is that annually we are expected to teach in sociology and anthropology as many as 8 to 11 100 level classes for students from across the disciplines who are fulfilling their general education requirements. So we need adjuncts because they're not hiring full-timers. We've lost 3 full-time positions in the last 10 years in the Department of Social Sciences. So we're down, and we were at 12, we're now down to 9. So here we are, still being asked to teach these intro level courses in the liberal arts, and we are still that doesn't seem to, in terms of the drawing students from across the disciplines, filling our classes, that right now that's not part of this concern. The summary end of this was that in the social sciences programs in general, and this is the summary last sentence, if enrollments in the remaining majors remain low, leading to a preponderance of low enrolled upper level courses in the major, the degrees in social sciences will become minors. Again, that was never discussed on the floor of the Senate and or the curriculum committee. That is coming out of the provost. Within our department, we have not talked about a response to that. I think there's an assumption that time will have its way and perhaps people will move on and such summary conclusions will fade. But we still feel that as a department, we need to take a position on this because that is changing the curriculum by fiat with no consultation at this point. I think the sense is that if that were in the department, is if that were to come to the fore, as in fact what was going to happen, that we would fight it again as we did this year as a proposal that had not been adequately considered by us and indeed would change the curriculum substantially. So, does that help a little bit? Yes, go ahead, David. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That really does help a lot. And we'll circulate the 2-page document that you sent to us. But that's a very good summary. And it's sometimes better to hear it from one of the people involved rather than to read the document, which just adds to many other attachments we get in email. With that said, I'll just note the econ department at CCSU is part of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. There was a proposal to move it to the School of Business some 10 years ago, and that was rejected by the folks in econ. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think what you say points out the importance of the university folks in particular getting together. That's you, me, Mike, and the representative from Eastern to look at program assessment, because clearly your programs are being assessed on exactly one criteria: number of majors, right? And even at CCSU, we do, when the numbers come in, there's also a consideration of student credits per faculty load credit, taking into account the gen ed teaching that we do. For a small department like philosophy, which nationwide has small numbers of majors, which will never satisfy the criteria that the board has put forward in the past. That's an important consideration. So I really think we need to take that, and you point out clearly the whole problem of relationships, right? Which I mentioned in speaking with the provost earlier. That there's I hate to use the word synergy, but there are synergies among the social sciences. When you take economics out of it, then you have, a problem. And, I usually mention in this context that apparently 6 prime ministers of Great Britain were products of the PPE program, which is philosophy, politics, and economics. Bertrand Russell, for example, did that too. He didn't become prime minister, but he did become a pretty prominent philosopher, logician, and public intellectual. So that was really beneficial to him. That said, I think we really need to get together all of the representatives from the 4 universities and look at this program review, right, which is, I think, going to be quite important. And then there's the whole narrative, right? If the narrative is simply, the sky is falling, then you have to wonder, why would the governor and the legislature want to fund us? And it's not surprising in a certain sense that in the governor's document, there are some negative, that they focus a lot on decline in the number of enrolled students, right? That's certainly a consideration, and it can even be an important consideration. But when that becomes the only consideration, then we're no longer dealing with true academia. We're dealing with a spreadsheet, and it's like, in a big business, what is the bottom line? How much profit do we make this year? That's it. And then, we cut divisions and we lay off people, and we increase salaries of the CEO, and so on and so forth. I mean, we have to really avoid that. So I think we have a big challenge. I appreciate your report because it really does highlight some of these problems.
And I would, our department, I've talked about this after I gave my first sort of overview before I'd seen this memo, and I think Ben was the one who sent it to me to wake me up. But it was so recent that I hadn't seen it. But at that time, I did say, and I've checked with my colleagues, and I think that consultation should include perhaps people seeing what we did in trying to explain our place in the university. It's a pretty comprehensive report, some 80 some pages, and one of the things we were able to establish is that with our service to general education, having paid our salaries and our benefits of our faculty, we brought in $1.9 million above the costs. So this idea that somehow by cutting us, they were going to save money, in fact, they were going to lose money. Nobody had ever done this before. And it's not that we did something extraordinary. We just looked at the numbers and the value of what we were doing. And sure enough, that seemed to have been one of the things that was convincing to members of the Senate and the Curriculum Review Committee and the Finance Committee. The other was a very compelling argument by an historian, Wynne Gadkar Wilcox, with what you just said, David. What does this do to the profile of a university in the mind of the public, let alone the legislature? So I would be in favor of getting together. I think it's a great idea, David.
Yeah, well, let's organize that.
Thank you.
Mike? Sure. Thank you. Mike? Still there, Mike?
My signal just went out. Did you call on me?
I did, yes.
Okay. It's wavering right now for some reason.
Sure.
I'm gonna plug it in. Hold on a second. Sorry. So there we go. What I wanted to say was, I think we should get together, but I don't think it should just be the 4 of us. And this, so David, maybe we could talk about that later. But yeah, I think we should get together, and I'm glad you brought that up, and I think we should do that. But I just wanted to talk more about how we might get together.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
after the meeting, we'll chat.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And it does seem like a conversation might be in order with community college folks also, in preparation for feedback. But yeah, I was really impressed by what you all did in Western, so that'd be good. All right, moving on. Okay, old and new business. This is where David and I can give our committee reports because I forgot to put it in. I can start with ASA. The BOR ASA committee met last Friday, and I would say of note, this is not comprehensive, but there is a new policy on centers and institutes out for revision. I would totally have overlooked this, other than I've heard that sometimes the details really matter. There have been struggles, so take a glance if you're familiar with this. Edwin Vargas, formerly a representative in the 6th District, has been appointed, is being recommended for appointment as the O'Neill Chair in Public Policy at, I believe it's at Central, right?
Yes.
Yes. So that'll go through the board next Thursday. There are new program forms, and you see an aspect of systemness in them, in that you are asked to account for how your program will affect other programs across the system. So take a look. I think it's page 202, could be wrong, on the ASA agenda. Yep, 202. Look at that. And then lastly, because we were just talking about Western, I just think it's notable that there are new programs at Western. BFA in theater arts has been introduced. A BA in popular music that's aimed at students who are interested in music but haven't necessarily had musical training prior to college. And there's a new BS in business at Central to sort of capture folks who don't know what aspect of business they're interested in at the get-go. So it's a more sort of general degree. So yeah, that's it for ASA. The board meets on Thursday coming. David, you want to do finance?
Yeah, basically it was quite perfunctory. I don't think we spent more than a few minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes. There wasn't very much on the agenda. There was some reallocation of funds that had been part of CSU 2020 that had been designated for projects at CCSU, which were just reassigned because the project had been finished and there was a surplus, but there was some other project that needed a bit more money. So that was a technical adjustment. There was some question about land at Gateway Community College, and combining that with a potential redevelopment project, which might at some later date include also a building or a structure for the automotive repair program at Gateway. And that was really about it. There's a mid-year budget update, which we really didn't discuss at all. But it does have figures on enrollment and so forth, which are down, but not significantly, in the 1 to 3% range for any of the institutions. So there has been some continued decline, but nothing as dramatic as has happened in previous years. That said, I find it interesting that we have never discussed CSU 2030 at the budget and at the Finance and Infrastructure Committee. That was entirely developed by the system office.
Yeah, it hasn't come up at ASA either.
No, that was developed by the system office. And, I think at best we can look at this as a framework. Obviously, filling in the blanks. I mean, we had a little bit of one of the blanks filled in today by Ben in response to my question about the 30 programs, right? And so that's a document, that's circulated around at the system office. It was obviously developed by the people in academic affairs there, but it wasn't part of the CSU, the brochure, which was made public. And I think we need to look at more of the details so we can see, how can we help in the accomplishment of some of those details, and how could also we modify them so that they are more respectful of faculty control of curriculum and pedagogy and distinct missions of the colleges and universities and the autonomy and integrity of the constituent units.
Right. Oh, I'd say another thing of note in terms of the Finance Committee's meeting is that we had expected that the topic of tuition increases for the community colleges would come up in February. They've already been raised at the CSUs in, what was it, October? And, you know, last year we had equivalent increases in both places. It seems that that's been delayed. I'm sure it has something to do with the fact that we are attempting to get certain kinds of increases in PAC to eliminate out-of-pocket costs for community college students at least. And what we get and don't get, I suppose, will be taken into consideration when that, if that topic is broached again. So that's worth noting. And I think positive because we're going to be able to figure out exactly how that affects students.
And I would add the component of the PAC Plus for the universities, whereby some students would get be eligible for PACT, but in fact, most would not. That's an issue that I think we need to consider at some later date.
Yeah, and honestly, like PACT has been problematic from the beginning, right? It was always inequitable, but what has been notable about it is that every year it has been expanded and modified in some way. I think that's, but the problems with PACT are well appreciated. And the fact that it's constantly kind of working against equity, right, is it puts it in a position that we are constantly working on it. So I'm glad that it's at least evolving, but it's far from actually sort of serving the appropriate purpose. And ultimately, the ultimate solution involves something more far-reaching than even just than anything we're in a position to deal with at the moment. But I like at least that part, that we keep working at it, we keep moving it, and we can continue to make the argument about achieving something like what it's supposed to achieve. So, yeah. But I share your concern. I mean, if we are only funding the workforce needs, or if we will be driving students who need that money into workforce programs when that might not be what they're best suited for, and might not be what they actually desire. So that is a concern, I think, at the universities. Brendan?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the idea that we can, so, you know, I don't know, in some sort of Soviet central planning style approach, predict what the workforce needs will be, is completely absurd. You know, they're pushing a cannabis major on our campus from top down, and like an index of publicly traded cannabis companies has collapsed by about 80% in the past 5 years. So, you know, I think we have a lot of reasons to push back against these notions, personally, but that's just my 2 cents. So.
I always find it funny the way that we work at cross purposes with ourselves, because we end up sort of degrading the value of our degrees in the way that we, for example, pay adjuncts and rely on them, or flood the market with majors in response to a specific peak, and then have these departments that we don't know what to do with always. But oh well, right? It's someone's job to come up with a spreadsheet, as always. All right, so we're still in old new business. Does anybody have anything you'd like to raise? All right, adjournment then. Motion to adjourn, anyone? And seconded?
Second.
All right, it's been fun. See you all next month.
Stop the video.